Hello everyone. If you are in the chat, please let me know if you can see everything well, hear everything well. In a second, we will try screen sharing again and just make sure everything is set up properly. And then I can probably, until there's a couple more people arriving, tell the story of what I did on the weekend and what I did in the last month. And then we just take it from there and discuss whatever we feel like. So nice to see you, Herstein and Jesse. Okay, let's try the screen sharing real quick. Let me know, for example, if you can see this. Yeah, Jesse, there's a call link on Patreon as always. If you can't see that, let me know why. I think I set that up correctly. I guess I just showed the call link to everyone, but if you manage to see it, you're welcome to join as a caller as well.
Sorry.
All right. Good. So one last thing before we really start. Let's do the delay test. I will count to 3 and then clap, and you just spam something into the chat when you hear it, so we can judge how long that takes. And I will actually screen share that so you get an impression what that looks like for me. All right. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, Jesse Miller doesn't count because he joined the call, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Whoops.
All right. So I guess it's like 10 seconds round trip, which is not too bad. Nice to have you again, Jesse. Hello to everyone in the chat. And yeah, I did a blog post trying to summarize what I did on the weekend. I will just quickly tell that again, maybe in a little more detail, and also talk about what I did in the last month and what I want to do next. And like I said, we'll just take it from there. So quite some time ago, I applied to a conference which is called RustFest, which is basically the European conference of all Rust developers, with a suggestion for a talk. Because, of course, as you might know, Citybound is completely written in Rust now, and the engine contains quite some unusual and interesting things, and I thought that that would be interesting for them. And I didn't hear from them for a long time, and then surprisingly got an email like, hey, did you get our email that you're accepted? I'm like, no. And it's a classical, I don't know, somehow the email vanished thing. Which, of course, made me very happy that I was accepted, but it also meant that I suddenly had to deliver on what I promised, because I didn't just want to talk about some possibilities. I actually wanted to show that it works. So I spent the last month of September implementing networking and the first version of multiplayer. So Inge and Levitje already say that they want to see both houses and multiplayer. I will see what I can offer you. I can't stream really smoothly from this Mac, which is where I have everything set up right now. I need to get the game running on, like, the development version running on Windows again for better streaming, but I think it will be good enough for today. Yeah, but let me quickly finish telling about RustFest. I did my presentation and people really loved it. They were especially impressed with the demos. I first just did something that you already knew for a while, which is basically the huge city grid, and just spammed it full of cars. And just as a kind of symbol to show that I'm really going further than SimCity 2013, which I basically started my talk with as the inspiration that started all of Cityborn pretty much. And then for the second demo, I did a live demo of multiplayer, which I can show you in some fashion today as well. And then the rest of the talk was quite technical about how the engine is structured and why, for example, something that's called an actor system as the style in which I wrote everything made it really, really easy to add networking and made it easy to design the whole thing as well, and will make it easy to make it moddable, hopefully. And afterwards, I got quite a lot of questions by people who were there about some details of that, and I guess I got a couple new fans. And yes, it was recorded. I'm waiting for the organizers to upload the videos. That might take some more time. But I will, of course, post it so everyone can see it. I was thinking if I should like re-record my presentation and demo for you, but I will first wait how long it will take them to do it, and only in the worst case redo it for you, because I think it's a nice experience to watch it in the context where it was. So if you want, give me a second and see if I have everything set up properly here so I can actually show you the game. Because since the weekend I've been working some more on economy, and I hope I have a working build, but I should. Yeah, I have. So let me start sharing my screen, and then I'll show you some things. And I'll go both into what I showed live there, and then also my work of the past couple of days, just so you're completely up to date with what I'm doing. I have so many windows open. This technology is overwhelming. Here, screen sharing. Let me know if you can see the game. And if I draw something here, if it looks kind of smooth. So the first thing which you will notice is that the background is green now, cheaply representing grass. And when I build these roads, what I can now do is to spawn some buildings. You will see that I have the game in a super sped up version, because it's night right now, so we'll have to wait a bit for the cars to spawn, because I'm debugging some stuff with economy, and it just takes a long time to debug that if it takes very long. So now when it gets morning, you should see the inhabitants of these buildings going about their daily business, probably first getting groceries and then going to work. Or not. Let me try that again. Got to be faster in building the city. Yeah, there you can see the cars zip by. It's really, really accelerated. So this is the first thing that I showed everyone, basically just like what can the game do right now. You can draw the roads and kind of have this interface, manually spawn some buildings, and then they already fulfill some of their like economic needs. So if we look at this family, you have the resources here. By the way, Inge, one thing just for you. I think I'm starting to be convinced about your whole issue of like not having negative amounts of resources where that doesn't make sense. And I think I will actually slightly adjust my model to make sure that's the case, because I actually want to model things like people running out of something. So what I've been working on the past days in economy is actually trying to get it balanced. There's a lot of problems with pathfinding, that people like go to work, but then they can't find the way back home, and I'm not exactly sure why. So I need to debug the pathfinding. And in general, it was really difficult for me to see what's actually going on in the simulation. So it created this per family event log of what actually happens, where you see what are actually the biggest problems right now for this family, like which resources are most important to them. Then it's trying to find on the market a supplier for that. And for example, here it didn't find any, but then later it might find some. But pathfinding can't resolve that, and I can now see this really nice log of what's actually happening. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing that I showed them is something that you already know, but I'll just quickly do that again, where I just spawned the grid with an 8-lane road, 10 by 10 kilometers. Let's wait a second for this to build. And now this will probably become slow because it can't do that at like 10x speed or whatever I'm running it at now. But just for the heck of it, let's also spawn a lot of cars. See how well it can deal with that. Meantime, let me see if everyone is still there. Okay, so the game just became super slow. I guess it can't deal with the huge grid and the 10x speed, which I unfortunately have hard-coded. Oh no, there they are. I hope I didn't kill it. But this will probably be a little overwhelmed. Yeah, let's just kill it. And then let me try to show off simple networking. I would just, the way I will do it now is not as interesting as I did it live, which actually involved 2 laptops which were connected over Wi-Fi. But what I will do here is I will spawn 2 instances of Citibound and basically tell them to connect to each other. So one of them will be running on port 3500 and the other one port 3501. Whoops. And you could put here any IP addresses of computers that can see each other, including over the internet, and they should be able to connect. We just need to tell this computer that it's the second of the 2, this instance of Citibound. So we start this one, and it's waiting for the other one to connect. Then we start the second one, and now in a second, I should see 2 windows of Citibound opening. I will make them smaller so we can see them at the same time. All right, whoops. So, and now as you can see, if I paint in one of the windows where it says machine 0, that's player 0. And in real time, the other player can see the edits that I make both to my plan, but also to the city. So if I build this, it's also built in the other player. If I spawn houses, they're also in the other Citibound. Everything, the whole world is synced. And if I go to the other one, I can even change the city from here, and it will affect the city.
Can you rotate one of the windows and then continue building? It
You mean that they look?
Yeah, they just look like a duplication of the video.
Yeah. You're right. This shows it off better, so I can actually like go somewhere completely differently. And if I build this, probably it will crash the game because buildings can't deal with roads changing right next to them. But let's just try. For now, it works. And I really have these 2 separate instances of Citibound, which again can run on completely different computers as long as they're connected. And the next demo which I did was to build a huge grid and spawn a lot of cars and show that it still kind of works. It actually can sync the positions of, I think, what was it, like 30,000 cars more or less smoothly over Wi-Fi. And yeah, that's what I showed them, and that is both for me and apparently also for them really cool and impressive because, frankly, I don't know a lot of other games where you have this real-time collaborative building in one world. And of course, there's lots of room for optimization here. This is still much slower than I would like it to be, especially if you have a lot of cars. And it's not really making use of the additional compute power of the second computer yet, where in a lot of cases it could. So this is just stuff that I will over time slowly add. The cool thing is that it almost at this point doesn't affect the game logic at all. And even while implementing networking, I almost didn't have to touch any of the game logic just because of how the engine was implemented. I basically transparently added networking to everything. And that worked as well, or maybe even better than I hoped for when I designed the architecture for the engine. So yeah, this is the end of my monologue about my progress so far. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll just leave this running in the background and see what happens. Maybe it crashes at some point.
I think you went and answered the two questions I had, which were, did performance scale between the two systems well? And I guess the answer is no.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Like, were two systems double the performance, or were two systems 1.5 times the performance? By the sounds of it, two systems is the same performance because you're not utilizing the second system.
Right now, not. So the way it worked, for example, was that all the roads and cars actually lived on one laptop, simply because it was kind of tricky and I didn't manage in time to have a plan when it's implemented build roads on two computers. But in theory, they could be on two computers, and then it should scale ideally linearly with the number of computers. And the way I think about it is that since all interactions in the city are very local, it should be pretty possible to chunk up the cities, just, you can imagine it chunking up in squares like a chessboard or something like that, and then have each tile running on one computer. And the overhead of communication among the borders of the tile should hopefully be much less than the computation takes of stuff that goes on within the tile, so that in theory the performance should scale even to really high scales, more or less linearly with the number of computers you add.
Because from what I know with NVIDIA SLI scaling, which is a reasonably well-optimized situation for graphics cards, that even just 2-way SLI only gets about 1.7 times performance in best case scenario.
Yeah, that's true, but that's kind of a very different problem set, because as far as I know, that's more or less constrained by the bandwidth of the connection which the two graphics cards have, and the fact that a lot of the graphics work is not that easily parallelizable, because these two graphics cards, at least with traditional rendering, do end up drawing on the same screen. And it's just very tricky to write game code that actually makes full use of that.
Well, I mean, there's some systems that would say each card does a subsequent frame, or, they do 1/2 of the screen each. But that still means you have huge data volumes traveling between the two for,
exactly.
60 frames per second video.
So, okay, regarding Citybound, I mean, the thing that probably will take up the most bandwidth is not actually stuff that's going on in the simulation, but basically streaming everything that needs to be rendered to the computer that's currently looking at some part of the world, which, like, the computer that's looking might be a different one than the computer that's simulating this part of the world. And I mean, static geometry is pretty fine. You just need to stream that once, and then it's kind of like a Google Maps thing where you probably get successive level of detail. The really tricky thing is to render remotely a lot of moving things like cars or pedestrians or something like that. But the way it is right now, it's not optimized at all. So I actually sent the positions of all the cars constantly to the other computer, even if the other computer is just looking at a small piece of the city. So there's, like I said, there's lots of potential, and I think it should be fine bandwidth-wise.
What sort of latency are you currently getting?
I mean, here if I'm running it on one computer, it's you can't feel it, so I would assume it's within like 1 or 2 frames. Over Wi-Fi, if a lot of packages are dropped because of interference or whatever, the latency can become pretty high, but I've built this mechanism into the game, which you can see. I will try to show these debug windows here. You see these networking turns, which is basically a measure of in-game progress of time. And just because of differences in computation speed and network delays, like you said, the two computers might get out of sync a little bit. And what I did was that they tried to stay within a certain allowed difference of time, which is like 300 of these networking turns. And then if one computer gets ahead because it's computing faster, or like the other computer didn't get all of the network packages yet, it notices that because it hasn't been getting a response in time and slows down its own simulation, allowing the other computer to catch up, so that yeah, all the participating computers are always more or less at the same point in time.
This might be a cruel request
Sure.
to ask if it works. Have you tried, do you know how much it would take to try have one of the clients close, disappear, and come back to the same simulation while it's still running?
So yeah, that's the trickiest problem. This is also a question I got a couple times at Rustfest, actually. This trivially works if it's a client that's just looking at the city and not actually doing any simulation itself, because then you just like remove the renderer from the group of all renderers, and as soon as he joins again, you stream everything that he needs to see again. But if you assume that it's a computer that's participating in the simulation, then it gets really tricky. The kind of workaround that I have in mind for now and for quite some time is basically that all network computers just take snapshots, so save games at regular intervals, and if you lose a computer, you just have to restart from the last save checkpoint and hopefully also have the state of this computer. But it's really tricky, and maybe for a long time the only feasible way to do like multi-computer city bound will actually be to have a bunch of servers which do the simulation, which you can trust to always be online and connected and start and stop at the same time together. And then you on your computer would just have like a kind of thin client that only does rendering but doesn't participate in the simulation. And that way you can easily join, or your connection could drop. And I'm not even sure if we need more. Like, it would make sense if you play over LAN, but then you can also be more or less sure that you are in control of all computers involved. Basically, to answer your question, it's not a problem that I want to try to solve yet.
Fair enough. My solution I'd thought of would be to allocate like a host computer in a network. So it still only handles a chunk of the processing, but it's also responsible for knowing what clients are dealing with what, so that when a client disappears, it can reallocate that processing to another system.
Yeah, but where do you get all the stored information of what was on that client? Like, if a road or a house only exists on one computer and all the others just send messages to it or render it, then as soon as that computer drops out of the network, these entities are basically gone.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what happens in any multiplayer game. If I'm playing Civ 5 and I drop out, then all the actions that I made within my civilization disappear.
And the game can deal with that?
Turn. Yeah, the game deals with that. In a multiplayer situation, everyone else's civs keep going.
Okay,
if you manage to log back in and reconnect, then you kind of just lost your turn.
But that means that still there's kind of this global synchronized everyone, but you kind of have it and can fall back to that if someone drops out.
I think in Civ 5, the AI takes over until you reconnect.
Oh, really?
I don't remember.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But yeah, like, to maybe sum up this whole thing, I want to first focus on economy and getting the core gameplay working again, and just have the networking as a kind of side thing that slowly gets better. Because just focusing on making that work perfectly is just will take a huge amount of time, and that's something for later. I think it's much more important to have it working as a single player game first. And then if it more or less crudely works multiplayer, that's interesting. But I don't think more would be worthwhile.
Inger's raising a good point that if you have servers, then it just becomes the SimCity problem of logging in, DRM, not available server space, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, of course, but that assumes that you're not in control of the servers. Like, you could just rent the servers yourself and run like Citybound server version on there, and then it's, yeah. I mean, you still need an internet connection, but this is what you would need, basically.
And at the time, I'm pretty sure the community was mostly, like, within the weeks before SimCity launching, the community was thinking the reason why they needed logon was because they had cloud rendering going on to help with the computation. And the community was mostly on board with that.
Which turned out to be completely wrong, right? Because they managed to patch it so it just runs offline.
Exactly. That was the big breaking the mirror, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So to formulate it the other way around, if you will need servers in Citybound because your city gets too big, they will really be worth it and they will be needed. And you can have all kinds of nice side effects, like having the city run constantly 24/7, and you just from time to time connect to it and see how it's doing and make some changes, which I think can also be an interesting way of playing.
That's what you call Citybound the mobile game. With your wait timers and come back in 8 hours.
Yeah, let's not go there. No, but I've definitely...
And that's how you fund the servers as well.
No, the way I would fund the services, because you know that I'm not into shitty stuff like that, and I think I can stop screen sharing so you can see my face and believe me when I say things like that. If I do the server thing, which might be definitely like a source of side income, it would basically be the service of me renting the servers and just offering them to you at a slightly higher cost, maybe with the convenience of being able to easily split costs between several people who want to play together on one server. But at the end of the day, it's just a server that runs Citybound that you can connect to. It's not anything, like, it's not DRM. You can play there whatever you want. You can, and that's for sure. You can even use mods on the server, whichever you feel like. Yeah.
What, mods? Not just the official main branch? That's amazing.
That's revolutionary. I mean, the one tricky thing is just to kind of save my own ass, is to make sure that there's not a mod which somehow like hacks the server, I guess. But then again...
And what allows it for Bitcoin mining or whatever.
Yeah. But then again, it's also just like a cloud server instance. Like, I don't care if you break it. I guess you break it just for yourself. So I think it's not that big of a deal, really.
And I mean, we've got to find something to make use of all of these whopping great giant new CPUs that have come out in the last month. Like, what a great time to be alive for CPUs. Finally, we have competition between AMD and Intel.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The funny thing, which a couple people commented on at Rustfest as well, is that they noticed, I didn't really admit it in the presentation itself, but I told them afterwards that Citybound is single-threaded but networked. So I first scaled it across several computers before even scaling it to different cores. Just because that was the more interesting thing to do in the short term. But I think making it multi-core should be more or less equally difficult as making it networked. And there you have, of course, really high bandwidth between CPU cores, and the scaling should be even closer to the ideal of linear, which I'm looking forward to.
And yeah, with the new 8th generation Intel mainstream CPUs, you can now get a 6-core i7, and the i9s and the other large Intel chips have gotten cheaper for the higher core count ones. And of course, Ryzen and Threadripper, you can get 32 core CPUs for only about $1,000 now.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about, and I'd really look forward to the time again regarding multiplayer, where if enough people pitch together, I would actually love to somewhere like set up just a beastly server and see how big of a city it can actually run on one machine, and then just have people connect to that. I think that would be quite a cool experiment.
Yeah.
Let me try to answer a couple questions from chat here. Jan Play Strategic asks, what's the plan with lane changing? City Skylines is very limited. Cars can only change between road segments. Yeah, so cars in Citybound right now, they only change lanes because they need to turn. They don't change lanes yet to be faster, but I want to implement that as well. Because even though I think you can't do that in America, in most countries I know you can do that. And they already do stuff like they try to start merging, but then like there's someone coming up quickly from behind, so they kind of cancel it and they try again, and they basically slow down more and more, approaching the point where they really have to merge. And it's already, I think it's probably already more complicated than City Skylines. It's still not ideal, and there's some glitches sometimes, but yeah. Interesting that you ask about something that detailed, but something that I have in mind.
I'm not exactly sure where he's going with this, but Parisk is asking, will things be able to go wrong in Citybound?
Yeah, I think I just dropped that because I kind of didn't understand what he means, but yeah, things will. So let me just take your question, pretend that I understood it correctly, and talk about something that I want to talk about. Things will definitely be able to go wrong in Citybound, and the one thing that I want to do better than existing city building games is to let the player know early on, to give clear signals why things are going wrong, and to give good feedback, both if it gets even worse or if the player actually starts improving it. I mean, that's pretty abstract and high level, but in pretty much any aspect, be it budgeting, zoning, infrastructure, design, I really want the results of your actions to be visible and understandable, both improvements and if things get worse. Your next question is, will players be working on one city or multiple? So the way I imagine Citybound to be like is that you always play in one connected region where you can just go everywhere. There's no hard borders. And you can create a village anywhere. You can create a city anywhere. And players, if they play in a multiplayer fashion, can actually decide if they want to collaborate on one bigger city, or each have like their own municipality in some corner, and they kind of cooperate through economy. And you can even choose how you want to work together in one city. You could divide roles and do whatever you want. And yes, there will also be terrain.
If I remember correctly, part of the road engine was that you could go and like edit an intersection and, you know, split up the roads, add slip lanes, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you can edit the roads at that detail. The intersections are still generated automatically, but you can use this system to create, for example, slip lines. Actually, when showing the game to people, I noticed that the current interface of laying down roads is kind of confusing, and it's not very simple to draw beautiful roads, which is something that I really want to do better than both SimCity and Skylines, because I think a lot of the roads which people draw there end up looking ugly. And for me, that's
Skylines does a good job of offering you all the tools you need to do good roads, I think.
But is it a lot of work to get them perfect or not?
It depends. If you have the mod Move It, it's no effort at all. So Move It is like this magic mod. It's completely, like, it lets you reposition any node or any spline of any asset in the game.
Okay, I'll need to take a look at that, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so it lets you, for example, fine-tune your roads to be exactly the shapes you want them after you've laid them. It lets you lay your roads with conventional rules and then break those rules by shoving them together or whatever. And it lets you individually manage props and all sorts of stuff, like to do fences or to do car parks or to do whatever.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And basically my idea for the next iteration of the road system is something similar to that, where you can a road pretty roughly, more like just with a gesture, and that tries to get the closest beautiful approximation to what you just drew based on some curve approximation algorithm. So just uses straight line segments and circle arcs. So probably you get something pretty good out of the box. And then to fine tune it, you can add additional control points wherever you want, and it will just become more and more precisely whatever you tell it to be. That would be a description of what I'm trying to do there. And of course, all the stuff like snapping, alignment, and so on is really important to build bigger patterns of roads that look nice.
Well, what the 3 tools that Skylines has by default is straight lines, manually controlled curves, full manual, and then just smooth splines. And for most people, they get the job done, I think.
Cool.
There's a good question about blockchains. Is there any way to use blockchain technology to allow large complexities to be computed in a decentralized way?
So I'm not quite sure what the person asking that meant with that. Like, all I know about blockchain technology is that it's too slow to do any kind of real-time computation. So I don't think that's possible. But yeah, just if you want to clarify what exactly you imagined there, let me know. But yeah.
Another mod that people are mentioning is precision engineering, which gives you detailed metrics about your roads as you're placing them, so exactly how long they are, what angles are between them as you're building them, which gives you greater precision in designing your city.
Cool. Yeah, maybe a couple more words about economy, which I didn't mention earlier. What I'm trying to do now, I have this mini economy where people just have money and hunger and groceries, and there exist houses and grocery stores. And my plan now will be to find a way to make this balanced so that people roughly earn enough to afford the food which they need to buy to, how do you say? Like to stop being hungry? I don't know. And can you say to quench your hunger, or does that only work with thirst?
Fulfill?
Yeah,
hunger?
fulfill, yeah.
Sate hunger? I don't know.
Sate, probably. And then what I want to add as an entity that will be, of course, very important is these abstract neighboring cities, which is kind of the context that your whole region exists in, where the city acts as a provider of resources, as a provider of working, of workplaces, so that the first settlers in your city already have a reason to, for example, be in the interesting gradient between two different neighboring cities, where one of them might overproduce one resource which the other one needs, and then there's transport going on in between them. And you have this classical scenario where a city in between, like along a road or at an intersection of important transport road, pops up, and then it's more efficient to live there because you don't have to travel that far. And I want to get these effects of like there being a reason for your city to start to get going very quickly, and then from there expand the economy with additional resources and businesses, pretty much. Will farms in Citybound be GMO free?
In sarcasm.
There should be a mod for that.
Or to make them GMO free or make them GMOs?
There should be 2 mods for either of the possibilities.
The default should be GMO free, and then you modify it to be GMOs because it's GMO.
Yeah.
Oh, GMOD.
It's a modification mod. Inge raises a great, completely unrelated point, which is something that I think a lot of people want to do, like to recreate existing cities. And for that, it would be super helpful to import like maps as images, or maybe even do stuff like import OpenStreetMap. I mean, how cool would it be if you could just from OpenStreetMap import all the roads and lanes? Like I think in some cities it has enough detail to actually know roughly how many lanes a road has, and then you can more or less guess it from there.
Well, there's a outstanding mod for Skylines called Simtographer, spelled CIMtographer, which exports your roadmap to an OpenStreetMap file. So yeah, it figures out what grade roads you have based on the game files.
And then you can render it nicely to show off your city, right?
Yeah, then like you end up with a cool looking map of the city. Well, most of the city. It doesn't usually get everything. So I don't see a reason why you couldn't reverse engineer something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is that for the map, it just has to look kind of like the city and look beautiful, whereas in the other way, it actually has to work as roads. But yeah. So how many kilometers long would the largest cities you build on a decent computer be? That's super hard for me to guess, and it's not really about the area size. It's really about the number of inhabitants, because that determines how difficult it is to compute the city. What's about terrain? Will it allow overhanging terrain? I mean, that's always the classical thing where it's super easy to create terrain without overhangs, and you can, but it looks much more realistic and cool if you can have overhanging terrain. I'm not quite sure. Spend some time thinking about it just because I really like to think about terrain in general.
Well, Planet Coaster came out last year, is the gold standard in terrain deformation now.
All right.
That made that. I haven't actually played the game fully. I've seen a lot of gameplay of it. It gives you a full suite of tools to fully manipulate the terrain, including a really cool.
Sorry?
You going?
Do you know if it's voxel based or something, or how do they do it?
I think it's voxel based. Yeah.
All right, yeah.
But it's well optimized. It gives you a great tool set that you can accurately control everything, make things quick, and it's made it fun to really mess around with terrain.
Cool. Yeah, that would be cool to have. I might do like several iterations where first I just have the traditional 2D height map, and then I might also use voxels, or like use voxels in some places, or whatever will turn out to be the best to do. I mean, something that's already really tricky and interesting is the interaction of like infinitely precise curved roads with this kind of coarse grid-based terrain, which you have both in the traditional 2D terrain as well as for voxels. But yeah, these are problems for the midterm future, I would say.
Here's a design question from me. You've obviously got the current houses just as placeholders, but is there any graphic distinction between the grocery shops and the homes?
What do you mean?
So are they identical models right now, or is there something to distinguish the two?
Let me show you. That's the networking version. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So you can see the houses with like orange gable roofs. That's residential homes. Whereas these gray boxes with flat roofs are grocery stores. They actually use the same footprint with this like randomly placed smaller rectangle, and then just add different roofs with different colors, because that's I hacked them together in 2 days actually.
They do look really good.
Cool.
They look like American semi-detached homes already.
Nice. I want to go back to, I had already slightly more involved procedural buildings in the JavaScript prototypes, and then slowly go beyond that. But it's surprising for me, both in the reaction of people who see the houses, like Inge, as well as actually my own reaction to the game, where like I work on these like internals of economy and how people work all the time, and I should have this feeling of, yeah, even though I'm just using placeholder graphics like circles for buildings, there's really a city being simulated, but it doesn't feel like that. But then as soon as you add like really simple, kind of cute buildings and make the background color green instead of white, it's like, hey, well, now I actually have a tiny city and it's cool. So
and
yeah.
that's all you have to do, and that's all it takes to get the players' emotions and imaginations going.
Yeah. And this kind of reaffirmed me in one of my beliefs about the graphics, where I first want to get like the bird's eye perspective right. So like the buildings might be without a lot of detail, but kind of the way they're arranged around the roads and the overall shape that a city creates already looks super realistic, and it evokes all the feelings of seeing a city from a plane, for example. And then as soon as that works, which I think is fairly easy to do if you get all the like simulation parameters right, and color schemes and so on, only then to add more details to kind of keep this emotional response as you zoom in more. Okay, I would suggest that we do a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back at, for me, 7, let's say 52. All right?
Okay.
See you then.
Okay, see you.
And we're back.
Hello again.
Hey.
Hello again. So, Inge Jones wants terraced buildings. I definitely also want terraced buildings. Terraced buildings are awesome.
That's not the word I heard. I'm glad that she wants terraced buildings.
What did you think?
Terrorist.
All right.
I'm like, well, that's definitely going to keep crime occupied.
Hey,
I'm like, how
enigmatic
do you
effigy.
approach that? Is that terrorist cells inside a building? Is that buildings that are destructible from terrorist attacks? Can we get World Trade Center in?
So much
rabbit hole.
confusion from 2 words.
Poor taste. Well, I was wondering when you're going to implement zoning.
After the economy basics again, where basically I will implement the basic economy and then implement some form of housing demand, and all kinds of developers are free to build whatever they want wherever. So you might get this weird mix of like residential, business, industry, agriculture, whatever. But then zoning is just the user interface to restrict that. And yeah, I plan. I mentioned it in the last Patrons Calling again. There was a really cool post about parceling on Reddit. And I somehow want to combine some ideas of there with the zoning prototype that I had in JavaScript for the planning mode. And yeah, that's my plans for that.
Thank you.
Anyone in the chat have any question?
Yeah, Singer has confirmed it was terrorist, not terrorist. Joined up houses. How would you code something like that architecturally? Because you would want terraces to be introduced in higher densities. So would you go from fully detached houses to semi-detached where they start to appreciate the architecture of adjacent lots to fully terraced where their architecture is defined by their adjacent lots? Is that how you'd do it?
All right, hold on. Maybe I'm not understanding terraced buildings correctly. It doesn't mean that like the building shape of one building includes terraces?
I mean,
or what
it
does
can.
it refer to? Okay.
I think it's referring to like row houses.
Okay. Just row houses.
Mainly. Well, and buildings with terraces, but there are a few of them.
Okay, so regarding row houses and like you say, every kind of building that's somehow dependent on the geometry of neighboring buildings. Yeah, basically the lots themselves need to be aware of which of their side is the side that touches a road. And then you start kind of deriving the building footprint from that. And I mean, the way it happens in real life is that basically the developers of adjacent lots kind of cooperate with each other by saying that, look, like I'll build the building like this, so the wall is from here to here, and you just join up to that, and then we can somehow save the cost of one wall. I guess that's the motivation to do that, and also to fully use the space. So it would need to have some kind of mechanism like that, where it can be aware of building geometry in adjacent blocks and have a tendency to attach to that if you reach high densities. Does that make sense? I imagine this to be pretty straightforward, assuming that you have all of this information.
Mostly.
Makes sense to me.
I think it just, for me as a non-English speaker, referring to them as terraced buildings is confusing. I would just call them row houses.
And for me as an English speaker, it's confusing for me too.
All right.
We'd say row houses.
Okay, to answer a couple of questions of Perisk, yes, there will be a rail system. I want to do both, like light rail, heavy rail, underground. I don't know, maybe monorail could be a mod or whatever first. And yeah, I definitely want European wall-to-wall cities, including sharp corners or buildings that hug a curve of a road or something like that. By the way, one thing, I'm not sure if I mentioned that previously or not, but I get reminded of it now that we're having this terminology confusion where I never really thought about internationalization of Citybound. Like, I just assumed that that's something that at some point I will think about, but I think it started to be something really important to me once I realized that, of course, children typically don't speak English. And even though I probably learned my first couple words of English from video games which didn't exist in German, I think it would be really awesome if just with the help of the community, Citybound would be localized to a lot of different countries with a pretty high quality. So it will
the
actually
best
be...
way to do it is to keep the entire user interface language free. I mean, I started playing SimCity before I could speak, so...
Welcome on board.
No, not quite speak. Maybe read. Definitely read.
Yeah, same for me. Will there be any way to influence the style of neighborhoods, especially in European cities? You have this concept of old towns. People might be interested in having control over that style.
So, I think we've had that was a conversation from a long time ago.
Yeah, I'll try to quickly summarize it. Basically, I want to have the concept of existing cities anyways, which could be like a village or whatever that you start building around. And then they could trivially contain historical buildings, which might actually have tourism value, for example, and it could be part of what you do as a player to ensure that these stay the same. And then regarding the overall building style, I will have to do some more research, but I've actually been surprised and learned that cities, at least around here, take quite strict control over how buildings can look in some areas, and the architects actually have to submit their drafts to the city, and they might say like, nope, that doesn't suit our like traditional or local style, or this is too dense for this area or whatever. And it would be cool to give the player some kind of high-level control over that, at least in addition to having maybe as a parameter of the map that you're building in which rough culture it belongs to. And that kind of determines the overall architectural style. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people, now that you've got houses, open the can of worms on architecture questions.
Oh, yeah, I missed Donald Jenkins' question. Thank you for answering it, Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
Inge Jones, including lunar. Yes, there we go.
Moon colonies.
Moon colony, Mars colonies. Got to have that.
Underwater colonies. Back in 2006, I got a pack of XP games. Crummy little tycoon games. Like one was a school tycoon game. One was a moon tycoon game. One was an underwater tycoon game, which was just a reskinning of the moon tycoon game.
Just like changed the color palette from gray to blue. Done.
I changed a couple of the models to make them look like they were underwater rather than in space.
Just make everything emit bubbles. It will be fine.
Yeah, exactly. You still had flying cars.
Cool. Yeah, no, this would be my kind of dream mod, or historical actually.
For people who like to really micromanage their own systems, like the sort of people who kind of treat it as like a model railroad sort of thing, SimCity and Citybound have had methods to lock buildings in place. But they've always been like cumbersome, and you have to individually interact with each one to, define them as historic or whatever. It'd be good if Citybound could have better tools for that sort of a thing. Like even if it was like a paintbrush, painting over areas that you want to keep.
Just like marking all of that as historical.
Yeah, so by default, like all of the city center is defined as historical, and you can go and revoke that legislation if you want.
I mean, that could actually just be a zone, no? Because like you can change the zones over existing buildings, and that could then affect both the possible users of these historical buildings and at the same time also just completely prevent anyone from building over them.
Although it'd be good if zoning could be kept different from historical definition, because say you've got an old building that's a factory or a shop or something and you want to rezone it to have a different RCI function.
Yeah.
You want to do that without demolishing the building.
Yeah, of course, without demolishing the building, you would just change it from like historical residential to historical business or whatever, the zone underneath.
I was thinking historical was more just a modifier.
Yeah, but a modifier of the zone.
Rather than having like residential, commercial, industrial, and then historical residential, historical commercial, and historical industrial.
But zones will have to, like, they will include a lot of different aspects. Like even in the JavaScript prototype, they included setback and maximum height. So yeah, you can imagine all of these kinds of properties of a zone, and their use, the land use, is just one of them. And then, of course, there should be tools to easily create a certain combination of zoning properties or to like pick them from somewhere and paste them somewhere else.
And if this like heritage listing sort of or historical modifier is a paintable feature, then you can apply it to like parts of a zone as well as the whole block. You could say like the front of this building needs to be kept, but you can renovate the back.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to have like sub-building. Jesus.
Well, or say you get a tiny brush and you highlight a tree. You can't knock down that tree. And you could do that like in a park or something. So if it was based on every individual asset and feature, like it would check, is this asset protected by historical listing?
Yeah. I mean,
because then if the whole building is painted, then by default, it's all protected and you can't knock it down.
Yeah. I will need individual asset management anyways, because I want to have, if you build a road, let's say you make it wider, I don't want to have the stupid system where like, oh no, it touches like the letterbox on the outer border of the lot of this building, so let's completely demolish it. And to implement that properly, so just the lot becomes a little smaller, but all of the structures that actually don't intersect with the new wider road stay the same. Yeah, for that I already need the asset level management anyways, and then of course you could have zones affect individual things on lots as well. Hi Planet 10. Inge finds painting always very dodgy with the mouse. Yeah, I tend to agree, but maybe we just need better painting tools. Yeah.
And if you're that concerned about getting, the front of your row houses historical, but not the backs, then I think you'd spend the time to really zoom in and detail the paint.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you just make it gigantic and paint everything. And way back when you had the Road to Alpha Week 66 videos, I mean, zoning was done by Paintbrush back then, and you did a really good job of keeping it neat. I don't know whether that's just professional mouse work or whether the game was guiding you back then.
That was definitely just years and years of using Photoshop with the mouse. And even for me, and you also have to keep in mind that for these demo videos, I like took the recording take where I did it the most beautifully. So it was really annoying, and this actually drove me to make it like attached to the road in the next iteration. Yeah, I think like snapping and grids or parallel lines and stuff like that are really important to draw pretty much whatever in the game nicely. One, just since we're talking about architectural details, one thing that existing city building games for me completely overlook or just do kind of automatically in a shitty way is stuff like walls in cities. Just especially in mountainous cities,
like border walls.
You have lots of walls, different levels of the city, and you actually need these to create like clean separations between roads on different heights. And at the point when I implement terrain, this will be something that I want to have in there from the beginning, both automatically in like lots of houses, for example, where they might auto-generate terraces in their gardens, as well as actually having paintable walls, and then for pedestrians also staircases and so on, so you can really build three-dimensional structures that exist in real cities.
Well, talking of walls, I mean, you don't want it on in every circumstance, but it definitely should be a feature to force buildings to construct perimeter fences around their property. I've seen a lot of city skylines builders waste a lot of grief and a lot of hours of gameplay manually drawing fences around all their houses because they're just buildings in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, and that looks weird.
It looks a lot better when every individual house has its own property defined by a fence.
Okay.
It really looks like a suburb then.
Okay, cool.
And that wouldn't be too hard to implement at a coding level, but in many circumstances, you wouldn't want fences around a building, which is why I say you don't always want it, but you might want to have a setting that enforces it.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, Donald Jenkins is, I think, going down the right track, where you have parameters influencing a building, roof height, number of floors, usage, eave length, and they should be modifiable.
Someone posted a really interesting video on the subreddit quite some time ago about that one of the biggest influences on how American cities look like is actually the enforcement of minimum parking.
Yes.
Which is something so interesting in of itself that I really want to have that in the game and have maybe the same effects.
Yeah, well, in America, you have minimum parking requirements. In London, you have maximum parking requirements. And that leads to a big distinction of character between the two cities.
Definitely.
Both between like how you see them from the sky and how buildings occupy the land, but also, yeah, how people actually get around the city and how the land is used.
I mean, in a way, the kind of almost comical conclusion from the video was that like all the businesses in America, not in the city center, but in suburbs, need to have so much parking around them that they're spaced apart from each other so far that everything is so far apart from each other that you need a car to get there. Almost sounds like a scheme from the automobile industry or something.
That is exactly right. That's the result of what it is. If you don't have a car, you don't get around.
Yeah, and for me, it would just be super fun to have a simulation where you can actually put in different values for this parameter and then over time see what you end up with because of that. Yeah, one of the things, getting back to what I'm working on right now, that I need for economy to work really nicely and to be able to actually visually follow what people are doing is to make the pathfinding more precise, where cars should actually be able to go into individual buildings. Right now they just go to the lane that the building is next to, and that's like good enough. but it would be really nice to just have the car actually go into the building, and for now it would just like drive through the wall pretty much. But
I'm at work, honey.
literally. But then having that, it would be really easy to add individual parking lots, or and use them properly, and then you can start having these effects. Another thing which is really interesting for me is that finding parking lots in dense city centers actually causes about 1/3 of traffic, if I remember correctly. Just like people who can't find a parking spot quickly. And again, seeing something like that in game would also be super awesome, but it would require an actual simulation of finding a parking spot, not just magically going into the building where you want to go. And that would be the next step. But for now, I have to make the pathfinding to be more fine-grained and the cars to go into individual buildings. And I think that already will look very cool.
Well, you could have driveway paths and maybe even pedestrian paths on the lots, the buildings, or whatever you want to call them. And then if they don't have it, you have to use street parking, although I think everything should have a pedestrian path. But that's something else.
Yeah, this is exactly how I want to try to implement it first, to actually not make the pathfinding more complicated, but basically just have each building have its own tiny road leading into it, and then see if the computation of all the pathfinding can deal with this like suddenly much huger scale where for every building you have an additional lane that also interacts with the lanes on the road. But ideally it would work like that. And then if you have huge parking lots, you can actually have like the lanes going through the parking lots in spirals, and cars using that if you wanted.
Yeah, you can have large multi-story car parks that are just using the standard road engine.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, the kind of funny thing is that you could even implement airports with airplanes and taxiing just exactly the way I've been implementing cars now, with the only difference being that some of the roads go into the air, which sounds like fun.
Ing is upset again.
About what? I'm not sure I understand.
I think she's interpreted what you've said as you're going to enforce that European UK standard on all cities, which I don't think is what you said. I think you were suggesting that it could be a variable that people can experiment with and modify.
Oh no, I think she's about like every building having their own car park. Yeah, and I agree. For us, it's also much more normal, especially in dense city centers, that people park on the street. Like almost no store has their own parking spots in the city center, and this is what I want as well. So it would be a combination of on-street parking and on-lot parking, but for first I would just implement the on-lot parking because it's simpler. Okay. Space CB asked, crime and police. I've never been able to build the dystopian, hyper-efficient police state I'd been promised on the back of game boxes. Isn't there this one guy who built like the most efficient city in SimCity 2000? And it's essentially this, exactly what you're describing, where there's like a police station so dense that there's not a single spot that isn't covered, and everything is just like stacked together into this, what looks much more like a machine than a city.
Yeah.
So regarding criminality, I have to admit that I always really love the actual animations going on in, I think, SimCity 4, where you could see like a shooting on the road or something like that.
And how the crime graph, like even though it was just superficial, it said like, you know, arson's going on here.
Yeah.
Embezzlement's going on here. Robbery's going on here.
Yeah,
and that
something
ties
like
into
this.
the fire too, that you can declare that a certain percentage of fires caused in the city are actually arson.
Yeah. So yeah, having criminality visible would be super cool. Yeah, road engine could also be trivially used for rail transport. It's basically like trains are just cars which can't change lane, and that's it.
Yeah, I was going to request earlier, pretty please, can we get trains soon? Because the moment
Yeah.
you get trains, you triple your fan base. You understand that, right?
All right. Yeah, that's a
if you
really
can't
good point.
Even if you can't put trains on those rails, even if there are no stations, even if people don't get around, if you have rails, they'll come.
Rails, yeah. I'll take a note.
Just take your roads, make them one lane, give them a slightly different texture, problem solved.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm already thinking in the back of my head how what I would call like batch transport, like buses or trains or all that kind of stuff would work like in the engine, where you have, I mean, right now, the funny thing is that every car is a single person. It's again very American, where every like adult has their own car. But I think I need to pretty soon implement that a vehicle transports several people who are actually on different journeys and just happen to share this one leg of their journey. And as soon as I have that for cars, it's trivial to add rails and trains.
And buses.
And
buses and trams.
And ferries and planes and
Exactly.
hot air balloons.
And hoverboards. Carpool lanes.
Carpool lanes. Oh, there are so many lanes I want to implement. The moment that you have a UI that lets us like construct a road out of a library of lane segments, I have like 30 lane segment ideas lined up.
Like, what if we actually put the pedestrian path in the center and then tram and then bicycles and then 2-car lanes and then a bus lane and then a railway and then a light tram and then
a runway.
And then a runway, and then we make 2 such roads intersect with each other, and what will happen?
What happens to the runways?
Yeah. Yeah, I should totally just, as an Easter egg, make it possible somehow that you can build like a railway through a runway or something like that, and then like the the plane circles until the train is done crossing or something.
No, you have boom gates for the runway for the train. Now, is it boom gates to let the train pass, or is it boom gates to let the plane pass? I'll let you decide.
The cool thing is that often to implement such silly things, you don't have to do anything different. Because if you need the, how do you call them in English? The crossing of road and rails?
Level crossings?
Oh yeah. As soon as you implement them for roads, like just copy the code over to the runway and that works.
Perfect. Just big. The asset scales with the width of the intersection,
Exactly.
so they're just giant gates.
Okay, this is the second node which I'm taking.
This is the second which?
The second node after add trains to triple the fan base.
Oh, perfect. Add train. Step 1, add trains. Step 2, add level crossings. Step 3, add runways.
Profit. Yeah.
But with roads, there are so many functions that you can just code into lane behavior that both super enhance the functionality of roads, but then also can really easily be applied to all sorts of different areas, including RCI and zoning and systems. For example, you set up a lane of on-street parking and you just use that to invent car parks. And
Yeah.
car parks are just little roads with on-street parking lanes defined next to them. You could have median strips with automatically generated planted trees that are used to make parkland.
Yeah.
You could have bus lanes, which are essentially railway lines, but for buses, and railways can become based on bus lanes. You could have transit lanes. You could have median strips. You could have like street lights as a lane.
Yeah.
So a tiny thin strip that adds a street light every 10 meters would be an entire lane definition. You could have like a crash barrier for a freeway. You could have sound barriers for a freeway.
Actually, also walls could work like that.
Yeah, and retaining walls could work as lanes as well.
Yeah.
A big one I am advocating for is buffer zone. So technically, it's a part of the road when you draw it, but it simply means that you can't build anything else there. You can't zone in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it stops buildings from building in that space.
Interesting, because back in the zoning prototype, I had that as setback as a property of the zone, but it probably makes more sense to attach that to the road, as you say, especially if you change the road, you still want the buffer zone to stay the same.
Yeah, so then you can still zone in that buffer zone. You just stop any buildings from being there.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing, like, even footpaths would work in this like universal lane system that you just described. The only thing that's really interesting for me is plazas, or basically places where pedestrians can actually walk around in a 2D space.
You could do it Roller Coaster Tycoon style, where it's just on the subsurface level a giant grid of interconnected intersections, and so people walk in diagonal zigzags.
Yeah, I mean, like, or what most games use for AI is these nav meshes, where you just subdivide any open area into a bunch of triangles, and characters pretty much move along these, which is just something slightly more flexible than a grid, but the same.
Yeah, once you have all of these lane designs, then you can build your perfect road with your like streetlights in the center, tiny spacer strip, 2 lanes, on-street parking, median strip, pedestrian path. That's your road design, and you can copy that around your city. Once you've got that, then once you can save it, recall it later for future use.
Or share it on the subreddit.
Or share it as like an asset to download. You've got full control over all of the roads of your city.
Yeah. Regarding the sharing, I was really inspired by the blueprints feature in Factorio, where like you can build some like sub part of your factory, and you create a blueprint for yourself to quickly recreate that, which is really handy.
Well,
but
exactly
then,
the same system as Prison Architect.
Yeah, but what you can also do is to share the blueprint, but they actually invented this like method, even though it's not really a method, where the whole blueprint is actually represented as just a huge string of characters, like, I don't know, normal letters, numbers, special characters. And because it's so little data describing this blueprint, you can just copy that and paste it into any online forum which supports text, which I think they do. Someone else can copy the string, paste it in the game, and gets the blueprint. And I think I can use it for a lot of different stuff in City 1. Like, even a huge highway intersection is not that much data. So wouldn't it be cool if you could just copy that as a bunch of text?
Yeah, if you had these like 30 different lane types in the base game, then absolutely you could. Once you start then modding in lanes as well, you'd need to make sure that you have all of the right files.
Yeah, sure. That's true.
Yeah. How would road transitions work, going from one road lane configuration to another? Say, for example, you approach an intersection, so you get some turning lanes.
So your roads are defined by control points, right? Which just give it its general shape. And then you can imagine taking each control point, and if you zoom in, you don't just have this rule of which lane is which kind of lane for the whole road, but actually at each control point you can change the configuration of lanes. And then between control points, wait, why don't I use my technology? This is actually something. Let me see, is that still connected? Because I think there we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, let's draw some stuff. It's the future. My pencil ran out of battery. Give me a second. Okay, I will just explain verbally first. Like each control point has the configuration of lanes, and you can actually change it per control point of the road. So does this draw? No shit. All right, next time I will make sure to have everything charged. Sorry about that. And
0 out of 10 on funding.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
You're like, oh, sorry for being so unprepared. I'll do better next time. And I'm just like 0 out of 10 unfunding.
Yeah. Shit. But yeah, I don't know if the idea makes sense as I describe it verbally, and then you could pull out after one control point, you could pull out the turning lanes and make them actually slip lanes or something like that.
Yeah.
And
I guess you'd just say that you take a whole like node length as a transition between two lane types.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy with how long it is, if it's too short or too long, you can adjust the length of the node.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if, the lane becomes the turning lane and you didn't want that, you instead wanted the lane to move over and add a turning lane to the side, then I'm sure there'll be an editor where you can adjust the pathing of lanes connecting to lanes. Then that's basically an intersection with two options, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One road in, one road out.
Okay, so now I can draw. So let's say that you have these, I will draw the control points in orange. And you just first kind of define the geometry of the road like that. So it will kind of go around like, let me try to draw over here, like this. And then you might say that, all right, first, let's just say you have 2 lanes on each side. And you do this kind of thing. Can you see that still?
Yep.
Yes.
And then you can do stuff like, okay, but I want this here to be a turning lane, so you give a special modifier to these two. And then these lanes start to be a turning lane starting from here, so along this whole section. And you actually might have, for example, one more lane coming from here, but then here you don't, and it generates something like a merging lane. So basically it takes the difference between all of the node configurations over here and over here, and then in between creates whichever transitions are necessary to make that happen.
Yeah,
and
the challenge
way,
I foresaw, sorry, what if you have the turning lane in the center? So you would want all of the outside lanes to be shifted across by the width of the lane that you've added.
And then what is the iTunes? What is the, so let's try to draw that. You have like a left turning lane.
Yeah, something like that.
Which then disappears, or what exactly do you mean?
So, I mean, it would probably appear.
It would appear, okay.
Yeah,
so
as you approach the intersection.
Want something like this, right? Where then you have 4 here. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, pretty much.
And yeah, so basically how that could work let me undo the last step. Let's say you just have it like this, connected straight. And then you have these small buttons on either side to add a lane, like here plus, here plus. And then if you click this plus here, what it actually does is, here it moves all of this stuff down. No, I can't do that. If you click the top buff plus, it knows that it can't extend to the other side because there's the lanes going in the other direction. So what it will instead do is just to move everything on this side of the lane down by 1 lane, because that's the only way to fulfill your new configuration. So these would get moved down by 1. You would get exactly something like this with a new lane appearing here. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes, thank you.
Because what that also allows is if every asset of the road is treated as a lane, including like pedestrian paths, when you add any number of lanes to the road, the path automatically works its way around the perimeter.
Yeah, and you can trivially have things like this classical situation where you have a green median appearing or disappearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, of course, you would want an option to add lanes between lanes as well.
All right. Yeah, the UI for that will be slightly tricky, but I think it just comes down to zooming in far enough so there's enough space to put buttons in between lanes. And at the same
or
time,
maybe if you hover over it at the right spot, then the button
Yeah.
appears, but otherwise it's just the sides.
but at the same time, you already want to be at the zoom level to even manipulate things accurately enough. So I think I will just keep this model, which I already have, where like more fine-grained controls start appearing as you zoom in. Yeah. Perfect.
Sounds good.
So let me check on chat. I think I will do like 5 to 10 minutes more if there's demand. We covered quite a lot of different topics today. I hope that by the next Patrons Calling, I will have some interesting progress on economy, actually. Because I really hope that economy will be the part where, as soon as some base exists, people will start to play around with the source of that. I mean, Marco, you definitely said that you're interested in that. Because it's really...
I am very interested.
Because it will really be one of the simplest systems so far, because like all the road stuff and intersection algorithms is really, really complicated and tricky, and to be honest, also not very clean in code. But if you look at the code of like how a family works and how they manage their demands and start trips, that's more or less straightforward. So I hope that this will be really easy to extend, and that it's easy to just take the grocery shop and copy paste it and make it about another resource. And then once there's one kind of interdependency between industries, and you have the example of that, it should be easy to extend this again to deeper dependency chains and all kinds of interesting stuff.
And then the challenge just becomes balance rather than implementation.
Yeah, exactly. And this could even be something where if there's enough people who want to look at the code at the level of let's tweak some numbers and see what happens, this could be a community effort, because like it feels to me as if it's this combinatorial thing where you need to try a lot of different combinations until you find something that seems stable.
Yeah, if the ability to modify the values of industry was just like a text file,
yeah,
that would really lower the barrier to entry for people to experiment with stuff.
Yeah, that's more or less how it works right now. Like there's more complicated behavior, but I will try over time to like extract that out into configurable non-code files as well.
Well, surely all of that complicated behavior are based on very simple pieces of information,
Yeah, exactly.
like time and availability and scope.
Yeah. Inge would love to get a
Cool.
hands on a demo with the houses in. Can we have something to
too.
mess with? I was thinking if I should actually, just based on this latest iteration of what I also did for the presentation, release another prototype. And yeah, let me actually just collect a couple opinions on it, because a couple things are broken. Like, I think some parts of the road UI broke. There's some things that you can't do anymore. We just forgot to copy a piece of code that existed sometime. But yeah, you can play around with it and look at houses. The only thing that's kind of missing is that it make it build on all 3 platforms again. Out of interest, I think that I would assume that most people are actually running on Windows, but if just you two, Jesse and Marco, let me know, and everyone in the chat, just put whatever system you would be using to play Citybound. That would give me a good idea. I think right now only the Windows build is broken, but it should be easy to fix.
Oh, perfect. It's only broken for most people.
I use Windows. And I'm perfectly willing to wait a month or so to get like the roads and everything working. But if
Yeah, I mean,
you
if you
faster,
think
that's great.
if you think that the economy is just around the corner, then I'm happy to wait for that to be finished as well.
Yeah, probably I will do that. Yeah, testing with Linux is not an issue really for me. It's just that I mostly develop it on Mac and Windows. It's like it already broke a couple times because of this one particular issue, which is always the typical, like, Windows does things in a different way than everyone else. And yeah, I just have to take a day for that. So yeah, I would basically have 2 options. Like, either create a prototype right now, just quickly make it work on Windows, and you have the houses and like the first super weird broken version of economy with some other bugs, or I take some more time and maybe we can see a little more of economy and then I create a prototype. Whatever you feel like.
I vote option B.
Okay.
Yeah, option B.
Again, chat, let me know what you would prefer.
Inge, let us know.
I mean, I've been seeing now that the more, like, people who are also programmers, for example, someone on the presentation actually took my work in progress networking branch. Back then it wasn't even the main branch of Citybound, and just compiled that on his computer and it worked. So there's some people who do that from time to time. If you want like the really latest thing that I was working on a couple hours ago, but for the prototypes themselves, I want to have some level of stability and predictability just because they do have a bigger audience. So Inge, the question was, do you want like a really quick, maybe broken and shitty prototype with houses very soon and just have to make it work on Windows? Or should I only create a prototype later when there's more of economy implemented and maybe I have some time to rough out some of the bugs at least? Enigmatic Effigy says both. The broken one, please. All right.
I thought so. So what you do is you send Inge that file right now, and you send everyone else the good one.
Yeah. I'll have the broken one, please. Okay, maybe I will actually end up doing both. Let's see, because I mean, the cool thing is that I have everything set up to really quickly release everything. And I was wondering, because there were several points in time where I had a working version of the game with like a tiny amount of new things. And I'm always just balancing off, like, is this an interesting enough increment to actually create a new prototype and announce that? Or do people just anyways from time to time want to play out with whatever the latest thing is? And I really can't judge that. So yeah. Let's see, I think I will actually create a prototype out of the broken one and just add a disclaimer and see how the larger community reacts to that.
Yeah.
And then at the same time already promise the next one when there's more of economy implemented.
Yeah, I think once one system is really well implemented, there'll be a lot of gameplay value in the game. As soon as economy is even rudimentary and works well with transport, then you've got 3/4 of a city sim there. Or once you've got transport being awesome and you can do lanes and you can do trains and you can do airports, even if the economy doesn't work, people will spend the hours to make a full road system.
Play around with it, right?
Yeah, as long as it looks good.
Yeah. Tomek asked, I actually have a Windows machine to build on Windows. I just never use it because I like using Mac more. But exactly for this purpose, I have it. More rapid prototype release cycle would see more engagement. Yeah, and I think it would also maybe give a better picture of like how quickly does stuff change actually. What am I working on right now?
How hard would it be to like create a farm, like the graphics?
The farm?
Super easy. Build a paddock fence, put a tiny building in the middle of it.
Yeah, no, I mean,
SimCity did.
I like the farms that I had in a JavaScript prototype where they actually are border to border with each other in the roads. And for that, I would need to add back lots. Right now, the buildings don't really have lots. They just try to not intersect with each other and with a road. And that's why they also don't have fences or any delineation, because right now there is no lots. So as soon as there are lots, I can trivially add farms again.
Okay, because I would love to complexify the economy once you have like lots and farms. Because then I can make farms produce fresh groceries, and then that goes to the grocery store, and then they pick it up from the grocers, and then you can send some types of food to the factories to make processed food, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you can already do that. It just won't look like farms. That's all that I'm saying.
Well, don't we all know that oranges grow on supermarket shelves?
I mean, that's how it works right now. Grocery shops just magically create food out of nowhere. And I think this is actually, and let me end on that, I think we found a nice topic for the end there. This is how I want to iteratively add to the economy, where first I will try to make it stable with assuming that grocery shops magically create food out of money and productivity, like workforce. And then you add one step to the chain where, okay, now they actually need to buy the food from someone else, like the farm. Now the farm is this thing which magically creates the food, which is already pretty close to reality. And yeah,
would it be just better or easier to start by saying it needs to import it from somewhere, and that somewhere is like the out of city place?
Yeah, or that.
Because that would set up a default that if it can't get it within the city, it imports it.
Yeah, that's probably the step in between the two.
Good idea.
Cool. All right, then. Thank you so much for joining me again, Jesse and Marco, and thank you to everyone in the chat for joining as well. Thank you for your cool questions. I will try to be back again with the patrons calling as accurately as possible in roughly 2 weeks. And let's see how quickly I can get out the kind of broken prototype, and then hopefully also soon the next one. Have a nice evening, morning, day, night, whatever.
5:30 a.m.
Poor Jesse.
Back to sleep.
Also, I want to try to do patrons calling on weekends sometime, because some people just can't join during the week. All right, see you all.
It is the weekend for me.
For you already, yeah.
Yeah.
See you. Thank you.
See you all soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.